Imagine a country, a disconnected country, one in which news traveled slowly and people still travel by horse and buggy, and occasionally by train, if they traveled at all. That's the way it was in the United States in the beginning and middle of the 1800s. But by the end of that century, the country was a different place, in the midst of dramatic changes. At the root of these changes, American ingenuity. People who gave us the offset printing press, which brought news to the masses. The telephone, which changed the way people and families kept in touch. The incandescent electric bulb, which changed how they perceived day and night. Even early recording systems that allowed for the spread of news, music, and culture. That was the backdrop to this important period of time, a second industrial revolution in which imaginative tinkerers were, more or less, retrofitting horse and buggy carriages with small motors, gasoline, electric, and even steam-driven, transforming this into this. The early 20th century was bristling with new ideas, and automotive manufacturing was the talk of the town. Some of the nameplates of these early American car companies are legendary: Stutz and Packard, Hupp and Hudson, plus countless more. Others are less familiar, lost in history: Wayne, Brush, Page, Winton, and Blomstrom. But they all left their marks, influencing the forefathers of the emerging automotive industry. One of those forefathers was Billy Durant, the George Washington of General Motors, who perhaps more than anybody else saw the possibilities. Durant was born to a prosperous family in Boston during the Civil War, but ended up in Flint, Michigan, where the family's lumber business was flourishing. Although school wasn't young Billy's thing, he dropped out as a teenager and went to work in the family sawmill. He had great business sense, determination, vision, and guts. He started his own companies, including a power utility. And by the time he was 25, Durant was a millionaire. Extraordinary for those times. Among his ventures was the purchase of the patent to a two-wheeled cart. The Flint Road Cart Company was formed, and so was the concept for a car company. Piece by piece, he started assembling a portfolio of organizations that would become its backbone. First, Buick, in which he had a controlling interest by 1907. And then, Oldsworks, which became Oldsmobile. In 1908, he incorporated this company as General Motors. And by 1909, he also brought into the fold AC Sparkplug, Cadillac, Oakland, which became Pontiac, and scores of less well-known ventures. He even, remarkably, tried to buy the Ford Motor Company to have a product line with a price for the common person, but instead formed Chevrolet Motor Car Company with Louis Chevrolet, a race car driver. Durant wasn't done. He bought more companies, including Fisher Body, Guardian Refrigerator, which became Frigidaire, General Motors Truck Company, the forerunner of GMC, Janesville Machine, and Saginaw Malleable Iron. Durant even started collecting companies with engineering expertise, plus those which made automotive parts and components. He formed United Motors Corporation, bringing together 5 businesses: Perlman Rim Corporation, Dayton Engineering Labs, known later as Delco, Remy Electric, the New Departure Manufacturing Company, and Hyatt Roller Bearing. It was a remarkable strategy. It gave GM the advantage of controlling the engineering and manufacturing of virtually all parts that went into its cars and trucks. United Motors eventually evolved into our Automotive Components Group, later renamed as Delphi Automotive Systems, and until 1999, when Delphi became an independent entity, GM remained one of the few auto companies that built practically all its major product components. Of enormous importance in the acquisition of Hyatt Roller Bearing was its president, Alfred P. Sloan Jr., known for his innovative approach to the management of the automotive business. Sloan became president of GM in 1923 and his influence was profound. By this time, General Motors was firmly established as the power of the industry, and it wasn't just in the United States. We became a multinational corporation very early in our history, forming GM of Canada in 1918, and opening our first European plant a few years later, building utility trucks in Copenhagen. During that same period, GM acquired auto companies or developed plants in England, Spain, France, Germany, Argentina, Brazil, even in India. Our influence on society was profound across the globe, as well as in the United States. Cars became more affordable, and increasingly were a necessity.
Come away with me, Lucille, in my merry Oldsmobile.
As cities paved more roads, connecting the dots along the American landscape. Smartly, GM changed the way people could purchase its cars and trucks, establishing GMAC in 1919, so customers could finance products with monthly payments. Increasingly, more people were put behind the wheel with a pricing structure that kept customers in the GM family. You could start out with a Chevrolet and move up through a Pontiac, Buick, and even a Cadillac, according to, as people said in those days, how your pocketbook permitted. Your car became your status symbol. Jobs were plentiful, and people flocked from all walks of American life to GM facilities for good, steady wages in plants that were turning out engines, transmissions, sheet metal, and components for the most popular cars and trucks on the road. It was also the time during which labor began to organize. Of course, the struggles are well documented, especially the legendary sit-down strike of 1936. There were, to be sure, some tough, even regrettable moments as the company and labor struggled. But in 1937, GM became the first automaker to recognize and then sign a labor agreement with the UAW. In 1941, the country entered World War II, and GM converted its production to the war effort. GM plants led the arsenal of democracy. It was no easy task. With so many employees serving in the war, the company hired and retrained an astounding 750,000 people. For the first time, African Americans and women became the major source of labor. In Trenton, New Jersey, GM and Grumman Aircraft turned out the Avenger, a torpedo bomber flown by the U.S. Navy and Marines. Oldsmobile became known for its artillery production, Pontiac for its anti-aircraft guns, and Saginaw steering gear for its machine guns. When the war ended, the U.S. economy and population grew quickly with new families, homes, and jobs as servicemen and servicewomen returned home. With no more gas rationing or tire shortages, people were ready to get back on the road. And GM was the fastest auto company to shift back into the production of cars and trucks. It was a new era. And in 1946, the company was poised to supply the huge demand for vehicles that would be parked on the driveways of America. Just 7 weeks after Japan's surrender, the 46 Pontiac was launched, and Americans were ready to buy them. GM was building cars with innovation after innovation, like the first torque converter type automatic transmission offered in U.S. passenger cars. Driving was becoming easier. In the 1950s, Buick, Cadillac, and Olds offered power steering. The difference was like having a self-propelled lawnmower instead of having to push it through tall, thick grass. There were many other firsts, like power brakes, fuel injection, cruise control, even standard automatic windshield washers, which kept the road ahead clearly visible. Innovations flourished, And to create a center of excellence, GM built its famed GM Technical Center in Warren, Michigan, bringing together on one huge campus engineering, advanced research, design, and manufacturing development. The results were an astounding number of advancements, like the 12-volt electrical system, which became the industry standard. The Chevy small block V8, still a sought-after engine, and a series of high-compression engines for more power and performance. Along with these innovations came a renaissance in American styling. The nation was introduced to vehicles like the 1953 Corvette, the 1954 Olds 98, the 58 Chevrolet Bel Air, and the 59 Cadillac Eldorado, embodying the prosperity of the time, not to mention a rather jet-age look. The decade's growth was phenomenal. In 1954, before it was a half-century old, GM produced its 50 millionth U.S.-made car. Fewer than 10 years later, GM produced its 100 millionth product and was hitting on all cylinders, manufacturing and selling half of all cars purchased in America.
In a Chevy, so make a date today to see the USA and see it in your
In the 1960s, 70 million children from the post-war baby boom became teenagers and young adults. The conservative times of the previous decade were evolving, and the country was seeing changes in culture and ideas. The nation was on the move. Something new was starting up. Muscle cars became the finale, and U.S. competitors vied for which was fastest. GM products were beasts, and they hit the street with burning rubber and throaty power that became a sign of the times. The Camaro, Firebird, GTO, Chevy 2, Chevelle SS 396, plus the Olds 442. These and other hot cars of the time made Detroit Iron the beefiest. And why not? Gas prices were low, GM's stock price was high, and made in Japan was still equated with cheap and junky. Few people saw the changes coming. Between 1970 and 1980, pump prices doubled. Gasoline was in shorter supply, and drivers began to demand more fuel-efficient cars. But GM and the domestic manufacturers in general were not tooled to deliver them. However, Japanese manufacturers led by Toyota were. The message was clear and sobering. It was, as many historians have noted, GM's significant emotional event, a wake-up call. The company had been defining quality by measurements like conformance to manufacturing specifications, while the Japanese were defining it by the voice of their customers. The distinction was obvious, and there were many responses, one of which was the establishment of a GM vice president in charge of quality and reliability. Another was on the labor front, as GM and the UAW negotiated in 1982 an agreement that emphasized joint training and other important provisions, establishing the UAW-GM Center for Human Resources to focus on health and safety, production processes, and more. That was just one prong of the response. Another was the establishment of New United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated, known as NUMMI. Interestingly enough, this partnership was with Toyota. The mission for GM? to learn the famed Toyota production system. For Toyota, to learn more about American workers as it expanded into North America. Another prong of GM's response to foreign competition was the launch of Saturn Corporation, the different kind of car company that took on the imports. With joint teamwork and new approaches in manufacturing, GM and the UAW agreed to the Toledo Accord, a joint commitment to quality improvement that paved the way for the UAW-GM Quality Network, a system based on beliefs and values. Customer satisfaction through people, teamwork, and continuous improvement. The goal was clear: satisfy the customer in order to maintain marketplace share and job security. It was common ground for GM and the UAW.
We love baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet. Baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet. They go together in the good old USA. Baseball and hot dogs.
But the 80s weren't just a time of quality improvement. The company also began acquiring non-automotive assets like electronic data systems and Hughes Aircraft to gain expertise and technology while developing diversified business interests. The quality and technology gains of the 1980s led to GM's stunning innovations of the 1990s. Perhaps there was no greater statement of this than the GM Impact, a concept car that debuted at the Los Angeles Auto Show. The car was the forerunner of the EV1, the first practical electric car of the modern era. Hughes introduced DirecTV, a satellite TV distribution system that brought customers more programs than ever before. Thanks to GM, daytime running lamps became standard equipment, making cars more visible and drivers more safe. There was also the development of StabiliTrak, applying electronics to improve safety and vehicle handling, the 100,000-mile tune-up, and OnStar, which has become the largest provider of in-vehicle safety, security, and information systems.
OnStar active.
Of course, these are just a few of the countless innovations. As the 1990s progressed, GM was becoming a truly global company, not just in terms of being multinational, of having operations across the world, but also in terms of how it leveraged these assets for economies of scale, plus diversity of product portfolio and expertise. From China to Chile, from Brazil to Belgium, and from Australia to Argentina, sales expanded rapidly. But these regions were no longer just markets outside the US. They were now part of the GM system as we began operating as one company. GM's development throughout the 20th century has been one of the most incredible stories in business history. But the 21st century brings even more promise and potential as innovations and the reinvention of General Motors continue. We have become an admired company for many reasons, one of which is our relentless focus on the health and safety of our employees. In fact, we have become the benchmark in the automotive sector and for nearly all industry. We are also admired for being among the leaders in corporate citizenship, with a record for philanthropy through the GM Foundation that has helped millions of citizens. Similarly, GM adheres to the United Nations Global Sullivan Principles of Corporate Social Responsibility and has received praise across the globe as we continue to focus on human rights. We are a company which values the diversity of our employees and customers, changing not only the face of the company, but also our operations with a wider diversity of thought and perspective. Our respect for the environment has been recognized globally, including by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for outstanding leadership. Increasingly, with a huge focus on being landfill-free, the only things coming out of our plants are our cars, trucks, engines, sheet metal, and components, not waste. And those products continue our heritage of innovation with bold new ideas and ways to conserve resources and prevent pollution. The future is now. The products we build tomorrow, as well as how we build them, will evolve with rapid rates of change. This is the picture into which you fit. As a new employee, you've become part of a remarkable heritage, one which matters, and one which will continue to matter. It boils down to you and your team as you contribute to the evolution of GM with fresh ideas. Products not yet started up, and dreams still in the making. Welcome to General Motors.